During dinner, my grandma passed me a flash drive. "Watch it alone," she said. What I saw made me vanish the next morning. She waited for everyone to serve themselves. Then, with a trembling hand, she slowly reached out and placed a flash drive beside my plate. She didn't say another word, just looked into my eyes with an expression I'll never forget. "It was pain, it was fear, and it was care. Watch it alone, okay?" she whispered. The conversation went on as if nothing had happened, but I already knew something was deeply wrong and she was trying to protect me. I waited until everyone was asleep, locked the bedroom door, plugged the flash drive into my laptop, and hit play. The video started with static. Then came a shaky image of an office I recognized instantly. My dad's home office. In it were my mom and my husband sitting side by side talking about me and about money. A lot of money. My money, inherited from my grandfather, and slowly stolen carefully, coldly with forged documents. My name is Daisy, and I'm 31 years old. I grew up thinking my mom was strict because she loved me, that my husband was distant because he was tired. But that night I understood everything. I had been chosen as a target, as bait. And the only person in that house who saw me as a human being was my grandmother. She knew. And at that dinner, in silence, she handed me the key to my revenge. The next morning, I threw on a coat, pretended I was going to the grocery store, and drove to the office of an old family lawyer. He had been close to my grandfather. I showed him the videos, the bank statements, the documents I'd found hidden in my grandma's safe. He sat in silence for several minutes. Then he spoke calmly. "You're the victim of fraud, Daisy. But there's still time. If we move fast, we can turn this around." I went back home with dry eyes, sat at the dinner table like nothing had happened. The smell of the food made me nauseous. My mom made passive comments about my hair. My husband tried to joke about my mood, and my grandma, as always, stayed quiet. But this time there was something in her gaze. It was like she was saying, "You know now, and you know what to do." That night, I started digging through the joint accounts. Found hidden transfers, loans in my name, investments under fake identities, and I found more. A pattern, a repeated destination, a name that kept popping up in almost every suspicious transaction. It was someone I knew, someone who should have been on my side, but was neck deep in it. And when I traced that name, I realized the betrayal came from even closer than I imagined. I opened my laptop in the dark, heart pounding in my throat, typed in the name that showed up over and over again, and clapped my hand over my mouth. Emily, my cousin, my mom's sister's daughter, the only family member I could still talk to without feeling sick inside. The one who helped plan my wedding, who held my hand in the hospital when I lost the baby. And now she was part of the scheme to steal my inheritance. The deposits in her name had been happening for months, always in odd amounts, labeled as family loans or consulting fees. She never worked in finance. She was an artist. And still, she received almost $280,000 in transfers from my accounts, most of them routed through my husband. It was obvious she was part of it. Maybe from the very beginning, maybe even before he met me, I felt like a zombie. Spent the whole day without eating, just drinking coffee and printing documents. I built a folder with evidence sorted by dates, names, amounts, even audio files. I managed to recover a deleted conversation between her and my husband from an old phone my grandma had kept. The content was crystal clear. He asked her to keep quiet about the plan and promised to split everything at the end. I could barely breathe. At dinner, my mom casually mentioned how Emily seemed happier lately. My husband smiled and said she deserved a peaceful life. My grandma sat there silently, and I began to simmer my revenge on low heat. I called a private investigator and asked him to follow the two of them for a week. If there were more secrets, I'd uncover them one by one. They were going to drown in their own poison. Over the next few days, I faked a trip to a work conference. In reality, I stayed just a few blocks from Emily's house, watched her routine, took notes, tracked who came and went. And one night, the detective called me. His voice was low. "You need to see this for yourself," he said, and sent a video. When I opened it, my whole body froze. It was a recording taken from outside Emily's studio. The camera showed my husband arriving with a grocery bag. He looked both ways, walked in without knocking, and locked the door behind him. 15 minutes later, they appeared on the back porch, laughing, holding wine glasses. He kissed her hand, then her lips. It wasn't a mistake. It was intimacy, and it felt like watching my heart drain out of my body. I didn't cry. I just saved the video and added it to the evidence folder. With each step I took, I got stronger. They thought I was blind. But I was building an empire of proof, a castle of truths ready to crush them. All of it quietly, strategically, revenge calculated to perfection without drama. Not yet. The next morning, I printed a letter with my lawyer and left it on the dinner table. A thick envelope with my name embossed. Inside was a simple message. But what was behind it wasn't a goodbye. It was the deed of sale for a property in my mother's name, one that now belonged to me. My mother always said that house was her only asset. It was where she grew up and where I was raised like a burden. She always said the house was just under my name for safety, but that it was never truly mine. My grandfather's will said otherwise, and my grandma, she knew. That's why she kept the original documents, notarized, signed, before my mom started manipulating everything. I used those documents to legally register the sale of the house. With help from my grandfather's lawyer, I transferred it to a real estate company that owed me an old favor. Within 48 hours, the house was no longer under her name. And the best part, she had no idea. Still believed she was the owner, that she had power, that she could laugh at me during dinner like she had the night before. Meanwhile, my husband started noticing something was off. He sensed my distance but chalked it up to stress. Tried to win me over with gifts, touches, invitations. I accepted everything with no emotion, no future plans, because my plan was already underway. That video of him kissing my cousin still burned in my mind, but I had already turned the pain into something else. Rescission. On Wednesday night, I sat on the couch with my grandma. She handed me a red folder she'd kept since my grandfather's funeral. Inside were copies of deposits, a handwritten letter from him saying he trusted me to protect what's right, and a bank card with an active balance. Only move this money when you're sure of what you want to do, she said. I was already sure. What I wanted was justice. The next day, I made an offer to the real estate company that had bought the house. Buy it back for a symbolic amount just to transfer it, but not to my mom, to someone else, an elderly woman alone, who had lost her home in a dispute with her children. I did it because I knew my grandma would be proud, and because revenge can be redemptive, especially when it hurts without violence. My mom started smelling smoke when she got a letter from the registry office saying she had to vacate the property. System error, she said, laughing. Bank stuff. But it wasn't. And when she called the lawyer she used to control to try and reverse it, he told her the truth. The house had been in my name for years, and now it was sold and it wasn't hers anymore. She snapped, called me 19 times in one morning, left voice messages crying, then yelling, then begging. For the first time, she was feeling the desperation she'd put me through so many times. When she canceled my health insurance without telling me, when she transferred my college enrollment to another city, when she forged my signature on a loan, now she was tasting her own poison. That night at dinner, she showed up in silence, sat at the table with her eyes down. For the first time in years, she didn't open her mouth to criticize me. It was my grandmother who broke the silence, and what she said exposed an old wound no one saw coming. My grandma finished cutting the chicken, laid the knife down on her plate, and looked straight at my mom. The whole room froze. Do you remember what you did with the letter your father wrote before he died? The question was calm but bare. My mom's eyes widened. Then she forced a smile. What letter? But her hand was shaking. You could see it. I didn't know what was coming next, but I could feel it would be big. You tore it up, my grandma went on. You tore it and burned it in the backyard. I saw you, but the will had already been registered. I had the original. My mom tried to laugh, but it fell flat. I don't know what you're talking about, Mom, but she did. She knew exactly, and now she realized she'd lost control. The quiet matriarch she always underestimated was baring her teeth, and I was right there on the winning side. The table was silent. My husband stared at his plate like he could disappear into it. And me, for the first time, I savored dinner in silence without feeling the weight of keeping quiet, because now I could hear their downfall. My mom got up without eating, went to her room, locked the door, and stayed there for hours. The next day, she made one last desperate move, threatened to sue the real estate company over the sale. That was revenge. Elegant, quiet, relentless. I started sleeping better, eating without nausea, walking down the street without keeping my head down. My grandma invited me for a walk. That's when she told me a secret she'd been holding for decades. "Your grandfather knew everything from the start," she said, staring off into the distance. "Your mother's betrayal, the lies, the manipulation, but he thought that by putting everything in your name, he'd protect what was his. Only you were still too young and they moved faster." I didn't respond. I just held her hand and I swore right there that they would never walk over me again. The following Saturday, I got a bank notification. A large sum had been withdrawn from the joint account I still had with my husband. The kind of transaction he used to make, thinking I'd never notice. But this time I was ready. And that transfer was the missing piece I needed to complete my formal complaint because he'd used my name to do it. And now I had everything documented. I took the evidence to my lawyer and filed for divorce, requesting an asset freeze. I also submitted proof of financial fraud, his alliance with my mother, and the affair. He didn't see it coming. Still thought I was weak, submissive, that I wouldn't dare. But I wasn't the same woman anymore. I was the heir to an empire, and now also the reason for its collapse. That night, I came home with the formal complaint in hand. But before I showed him anything, I found something on his phone that completely changed the scale of what he'd done. Among deleted photos and old emails, I found proof that my name had been used in something even bigger and federal. My husband had left his phone charging and gone out for a run. No password. It was the perfect chance. I searched hidden folders, old email apps, archived chats, and there it was. A lease contract for a warehouse digitally signed in my name. I had never seen it before, but the address rang a bell. I went to the garage and wrote it down. I looked it up in public records. The warehouse was listed as the headquarters of an import company opened 2 years ago with me as the majority owner. And the worst part, the company was under investigation for suspicious activity, money laundering. I nearly passed out. They were using my identity to cover up a federal crime. And if I didn't act fast, it would all fall on me. I called my lawyer right away. He told me to go straight to the local FBI office with every document and screenshot. I waited for my husband to fall asleep, backed up everything, and organized a new folder. When I got there, they listened to me for hours. I showed them everything and I made it clear. I was being used as a shell without my knowledge. The lead agent looked me in the eyes and said firmly, "Thank you for coming. You just gave us exactly what we were missing." I went back home in silence. He was watching TV. I looked at him like it was the last time. The next morning, I got a call from the federal investigation. The warehouse had been searched. Computers seized, accounts frozen, and a subpoena had been issued. Not just for him, for 3 others, including my cousin and my mother. The news spread fast. My mom panicked, called me cruel, ungrateful, said, "You don't destroy family like this." But she destroyed ours years ago, and now she was just feeling the weight of what she caused. This wasn't about cruelty. It was about justice. And if it hurt, that meant it was finally working. My husband, meanwhile, tried to downplay it. Said it was an accounting issue that he didn't know about the investigation. But the emails were there, the transfers, the messages with my cousin. He knew, and he gambled on me never finding out, on me never having the strength to fight back. But he was wrong. And now he was watching the woman he used turn into the woman who would destroy him. The night he got the subpoena, he slept on the couch. And while he snored, I just watched him in silence, thinking about everything I'd lost. My years, my health, my peace. But now I had something better. I had power. And I would use every drop of it. Not out of spite, but for memory. For the woman I used to be, the one they tried to erase. The next morning, an FBI van pulled up in front of my grandma's house. But she didn't look scared. She just lifted her chin, turned to me and said, "There's something you still don't know, Daisy, and I need to show you today." My grandma led me to her bedroom where she kept a small locked chest of drawers. She took a key off a necklace around her neck and unlocked the bottom drawer. Inside was a thick, yellowed envelope. "Your grandfather asked me to keep this until it was needed," she said. My hands were sweating. When I opened it, I found old contracts, copies of accounts in my mother's name, and an alternate will, one that overruled the previous one. In it, my grandfather stated that if there was ever proof of misconduct by my mother, all assets would go directly to me. And more than that, he had already transferred international assets in my name. This wasn't just a defense. It was a shield, a legal bomb, a desperate act of protection that had been waiting for years. My grandfather had foreseen everything and trusted me to finish what he started. I didn't speak. Neither did my grandma. It felt like we were mourning what could have been. If only I'd seen it sooner. But now it was too late for regrets. It was time to act. I called my lawyer and asked for an urgent meeting. When I showed him the documents, he looked at me like he'd found the missing piece of the puzzle. This changed everything and gave weight to everything I was about to do. I went back home and found my husband in the living room with his bags packed. He said he was going away to clear his head. Lie. He was trying to run, but the asset freeze was already in effect and his passport seized. He lost it. Called me crazy, ungrateful, a liar. And me, I just looked at him. He had no idea that at that very moment his name was already under investigation in 2 countries. The next night, I went to my cousin's house. I brought a letter with me, not to hand to her, but to leave at the gate. Inside were copies of statements, screenshots, contracts, and 1 sentence. If you come to me, I might ask for a lighter sentence. If not, face the consequences. It was my final warning. I wanted her to know this wasn't personal. It was justice. And justice doesn't forget. My mother started calling me every day, crying, threatening, begging. In one call, she said she was going to do something terrible. But by then, I had a restraining order, and every one of her calls was now being recorded and filed as evidence of instability. She was sinking on her own. And the truth, I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt relief. A week later, I got a subpoena to testify again. When I arrived, the agent greeted me with a strange look, asked me to wait in the witness room. 10 minutes later, she came in and said, "There's something you need to see. It's not about your mother or your husband. It's about someone else." My heart raced. I wasn't ready for another twist. She placed a tablet on the table, hit play on a security video, and the moment the footage came up, I lost my breath. The person in that recording was someone I never ever would have suspected, and he'd been inside my house the whole time. The footage was from our front yard, captured by the security cam out front. In the video, I'm seen leaving for the market like I did every Saturday. Then right after, who shows up? My father-in-law. He looks around, slips something in his pocket, and enters through the back door with a copy of the key. My blood ran cold. I never gave him a key. And the last time I'd spoken to that man was Christmas, 2 years ago. The agent paused the video and looked at me seriously. "This access wasn't authorized by anyone in the house, correct?" I shook my head. She resumed the video. My father-in-law was rifling through drawers, taking photos of documents, and finally unlocking the drawer where I kept the legal case files. That was espionage, obstruction, and somehow he was acting as an accomplice. I couldn't figure out how or why. I left the FBI office in shock. My grandma was waiting in the car. When I told her, she just sighed and muttered, "So he's back?" Her words gave me chills. Back from where? I asked, and what she told me next completely changed the way I saw everything. My father-in-law and my mother had been involved in the past before I ever got married. A financial deal, a transaction, and now everything made sense. My marriage was arranged, not for love, but for money, for power. My father-in-law was the secret link between them all. He convinced my husband to marry me because he knew about the inheritance, knew about the assets, knew I was easy to manipulate. Or at least that's what they thought. My mother was in on it. And I was placed at the center of a stage built on greed, a fake marriage, a fake life. I went back home and dug through old family photos. I started looking closely at gestures, at glances, at all those trips my mother took with flimsy excuses, the meetings with my father-in-law. She thought no one noticed. It was all there. And I hadn't seen it because I'd spent my whole life thinking I was the problem. That I was difficult, disconnected, dramatic. But the truth was so much worse. I was surrounded by predators. My lawyer updated the petition to include my father-in-law's unlawful entry and his connection to the fraud network. The police opened a new investigation, and my husband, still trying to fake innocence, started to crack. His expression changed. He didn't smile anymore, avoided eye contact, slept poorly because he knew now. It was only a matter of time before, in the middle of it all, my cousin finally responded, asked to meet, said she needed to confess that she had something to show me. I agreed but brought my lawyer and recorded everything. When she arrived, she was pale, shaking, and holding a folder that looked like it had years of dust on it. "I found it in my mom's attic," she said. "It's about your dad." Those words froze me inside. My dad died when I was a teenager. I always thought he was the only one in the family who truly loved me. But what she pulled from that folder made me question everything I remembered about him. She opened the folder with trembling hands. Inside were letters, not copies. Originals stamped, dated, signed, addressed to my mom, written by my dad. The first one was short. He asked to see the girl that weekend, said he missed her, that he wanted to talk to me about something important. It made me cry because at the time my mom told me he never called. The other letters grew longer and more desperate. In one, he wrote clearly, "If you don't let me tell Daisy that half of her grandfather's inheritance belongs to her, I'll get a lawyer." That letter was dated just 2 months before he died. And then the bombshell. A torn page jagged at the edge read, "If anything happens to me, look for the account under H. Carter and Associates." It's all there, my dad knew. He knew they were trying to erase me from the story, that they wanted to keep me blind, small, vulnerable, and he tried to protect me, tried to do the right thing, but he died before he could. Officially, it was a car accident. But now doubt was eating me alive because every piece fit, and my father-in-law's constant presence at that time never seemed suspicious until now. I gave the papers to my lawyer. He forwarded them to the right department. The case was reopened, and an order was issued for the insurance company to release the full accident report. There were too many inconsistencies. Unlogged calls, clipped audio, and the supposed witness, someone who worked for my father-in-law's company. I felt like a ghost in my own life. Like everything I'd lived was staged. Like the memories I cherished were built on lies. And yet I felt more alive than ever. Because now I had what they feared most. Truth. And truth has weight. Has timing. Has breath. It doesn't disappear. My husband tried to confront me. Said I was destroying everyone. That I was turning into some revenge-obsessed lunatic. I didn't answer. I just placed the partial report on the table, showed him the photos, the statements, the footage of his dad sneaking into my house. He went pale. Stammered, then asked barely a whisper, "What do you want from me?" I looked him in the eye the way you look at a rat in a trap. I wanted everything. Everything they took, everything they hid, everything they tried to destroy. And I wanted him to witness the fall up close, helpless. He didn't reply, just stumbled out. That was the last time he ever stepped foot in that house because the next day I got an email from the company he worked for, and it was more than a firing. It was a public scandal. But the most devastating part was attached. A full dossier listing other people involved. And one of them still lived under my grandma's roof. The name was right there in the attachments. James Crawford, husband of my grandfather's sister. For years, he lived with my grandma, helping with small repairs, going to appointments with her, acting like a family friend. I saw him as a kind, quiet old man, almost invisible. But there he was, listed as a consultant for H. Carter and Associates, the same company mentioned in my dad's letter, the one behind the hidden account. I came home nauseous. My grandma was in the garden watering plants. I sat beside her and asked, "Did you know?" She lowered the watering can, sat in her wicker chair, and said, "I suspected, but I had no proof." She handed me a small box of keys. "This one's for the locked cabinet in the shed. He never let anyone touch it. It felt like something out of a movie, but it was my life." I went to the shed with sweaty hands. The smell of wood and oil was familiar. I found the cabinet. The key turned with effort. Inside I found folders, flash drives, business cards, and a journal. On top, a folded page, a list of names. My mom, my father-in-law, my husband, and others I didn't recognize, all connected by arrows. It was a map of alliances, a skeleton of conspiracy. I read the journal carefully. James had documented meetings, transfers, strategy sessions. There were pages detailing how they convinced my grandfather to trust him with international business. Then how they slowly chipped away at his authority until he was completely isolated. My grandfather, a strong visionary man, had been manipulated at the end of his life, and most of what he built was stolen without him even noticing. My grandma cried as she read out of pain, shame, helplessness, but also out of fury. They're going to pay Daisy for all of it. And that's how the next step of our revenge was born. We compiled everything into a dossier with chronological attachments and cross-referenced evidence. We didn't just send it to the FBI. We sent it to investigative journalists, too. Now, it wasn't just legal justice. It was public justice. The next day, I got a call from a reporter. The story would go live on Sunday. And with it, the names, the documents, the schemes, nothing would stay hidden. My father-in-law would be exposed, my mother too. And with luck, even my father's death would be investigated properly. My heart raced, but for the first time, it was out of anticipation, not fear. James was subpoenaed that week. He tried to deny everything, claimed he was just an accountant. But the documents spoke for themselves, and when his name hit the news, the masks started falling. Family friends pulled away. Invitations disappeared. People looked at them differently. They were getting a taste of what they always dished out: shame, isolation, the shame of who they really were. It was on a quiet night that my grandma knocked on my bedroom door. Her eyes were swollen. "Daisy," she said, "there's something I've never told you about your mother. But now I think it's time." And what she revealed that night rewrote everything I thought I knew about where I came from. She sat on the edge of my bed, eyes fixed on the floor. "Your mother wasn't raised by me," she said quietly. "She's my stepdaughter, and your grandfather never wanted her to inherit anything." I was stunned. "But she said she was your real daughter." "She wasn't. We raised her after her mother died. Your grandfather tried to include her, but she always held resentment, always wanted more than she was given." She went on, said, "My mother had been manipulative since she was young, faked report cards, cried to get her way, stirred up drama between siblings. Your grandfather wanted her out of the will, but she threatened to destroy everything, said she'd spread lies about him, make up scandals, and he gave in out of fear, out of guilt. The same fear that ruled my grandma for years until now. That explained everything. The coldness, the distance, why I never felt embraced. I was just a tool, a bridge between her and the family fortune. My whole life had been used to hide her fake origin, and I didn't know. But now, with the evidence in hand, it also changed my legal rights because as a stepdaughter, she never had any legal claim to what she stole. The next day, my lawyer filed a new motion to annul the transactions she had made. We included proof of forgery, concealment of parentage, and misuse of the family name. Legally, she wasn't a direct heir, and everything she built under my name would be undone. Justice doesn't just come with handcuffs. It comes with letterhead, with stamps, with irrevocable clauses. The story went live that Sunday. It exploded across social media, newspapers, local news, legal blogs. My name was there, yes, but as the whistleblower, the heir who unraveled a family scheme. My face wasn't shown, but theirs was. My mother's, my father-in-law's, my ex-husband's, and James's all connected by a single thread. Greed, lies, fraud, they knew it was the end. Then came the apologies, the let's talk messages. A distant cousin offered emotional support. My ex claimed he was manipulated by his own family. Everyone wanted to avoid consequences, but revenge, when done with patience, doesn't need to scream. It just needs silence. And time was running out for them all. My mom tried to flee the country, got stopped at the airport. James fainted during questioning. My ex was sued for breach of contract and tax evasion. And the most symbolic part of it all, the house where my mom grew up, the one I sold at the very start, was demolished. A senior living complex was being built there, and the name of the main building, Theodore, my grandfather's name. That night, I sat on the porch with my grandma. The breeze was soft, the world finally quiet. She looked at me with tenderness and said, "You didn't get revenge. You cleaned your father's name and honored who you are." But before I could answer, there was a knock at the door. And on the other side stood a woman I hadn't seen since my father's funeral, holding a suitcase in her hand. The woman looked older, but her eyes hadn't changed. It was Miranda, my father's former secretary, the only person who ever treated me kindly at his office. She vanished after his death, and everyone said she had moved away without telling anyone. And now there she was, standing at my door, holding a leather suitcase and a thick envelope. "We need to talk," was all she said. I just stepped aside and let her in. We sat in the living room with my grandma. Miranda opened the suitcase and laid dozens of documents on the table. "These are copies your father had made in case something ever happened to him. He gave them to me a week before the accident." Among the papers were invoices, transfers to suspicious accounts, and a handwritten letter addressed directly to me. "If you're reading this, Daisy, it means I couldn't tell you in person." The letter broke me. He said he was afraid of what my mother was capable of, that he had discovered her connection to my father-in-law, that the marriage had been arranged behind my back, and that he tried to call it off but was threatened. He said he suspected he was being watched. And if anything strange happened to him, I shouldn't trust the official report. Follow the money, Daisy. The truth is there, my grandma cried silently. Miranda Steady handed me a flash drive with old footage, recordings from the office, hidden meetings, and a conversation between my dad and James where my father confronted him about suspicious transactions and said, "I won't let my father's legacy become part of a dirty scheme." His voice trembled, but he stood his ground. And shortly after that recording, he died. Everything made sense now. I had the full trail, the motives, the threats, the evidence. With that material, my father's death was no longer archived. It was officially reclassified as suspected homicide with financial fraud. My ex-husband was named. So was James. And my mother was summoned again with the possibility of pretrial detention finally. But what Miranda told me next was even more unexpected. She said that deep down, my father didn't just want to protect me financially. He wanted me out of that environment. He wanted me to study abroad to rebuild my life far away from all of them. He opened an account in your name in another state. Never touched the money, just saved it for you. Only you can access it. I was speechless. I never expected any of this. A father I thought was passive now stood as someone who had fought for me until the end, who left an escape route knowing he might not be there to guide me. My grandma held my hand and said, "You still have choices, Daisy, even after all this. Revenge brought justice, but now what will you do with the freedom that's left?" That night, I went to my room with the flash drive in hand, sat on the bed, opened the laptop, and clicked on the last file. No title, no date, but what played next. Neither Miranda nor my grandma had ever seen. And what showed up wasn't about the past. It was a recording made just weeks ago by someone still among us. The video began in silence, shot on a phone, the camera hidden behind a stack of books. I recognized the setting right away. My mother's office. But the first face to appear wasn't hers. It was James's. He walked in carefully, placed an envelope on the desk, and whispered, "If this ends up in the wrong hands, we're dead." My whole body froze. Then my mother rushed in, locking the door behind her. She opened the envelope, read its contents, and started to cry. She knows everything. Daisy is digging up what we've been trying to bury for years. That old witch should have never survived. She meant my grandma. I paused the video, wanted to scream, but I breathed deep. That clip was everything I needed. Confession, intent, and threat. I kept watching. James said the original plan was just to push my father out of the company until he signed the papers. But he resisted, threatened to go public. The accident was unfortunate, but maybe it had to happen. Those cold, flat words hit like a punch to the gut. There was no doubt anymore. They were responsible, even if indirectly, and they had no remorse. The final part of the video was even worse. My mom picked up her phone and made a call. "We need to burn the documents in the old house's basement." All of them. Today, she was talking to a man. His voice was deep. I turned the volume up and listened closely. And then I recognized it. It was my ex-husband. He agreed to everything. He knew he was involved and still trying to cover it all up. The next morning, I handed the video over to the authorities. They said it was more than enough to open a new criminal case, this time for conspiracy and destruction of evidence. And since the video was recent, it could implicate all three of them in new crimes. Revenge had now taken a new form. It wasn't just mine anymore. It was public, institutional. The system itself was now fighting back. My mother was brought in for questioning. So was James. And my ex finally got a temporary arrest warrant. The whole thing collapsed. Headlines flashed their faces with the words I had always wanted to see tied to that family. Fraud, manipulation, crime. And in the middle of all that chaos, I felt clean, like every piece had returned to its place. Like my dad could finally rest. My grandma looked at me during lunch and said, "You did all this without yelling, without lowering yourself." That was justice, not revenge. But deep down, I knew it was both. Because when revenge is fair, it also heals old wounds. It honors memories. And sometimes it rebuilds families. Miranda stayed with us, and it felt like we'd become a fortress of surviving women, strong enough to start over. That day, I thought the cycle was finally closed. But that night, I found an unmarked envelope in the mailbox. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a handwritten message. "You haven't uncovered everything. There's still one piece left, and it's very close to you." I stared at that sentence for minutes. "You haven't uncovered everything." The handwriting was shaky, old. I didn't recognize it at first, but the message was clear. There was still a secret. something that slipped past me, something buried for years that even after all this still remained. And according to the note, it was close. But close to who? I tore through the house, rechecked every document, reread James's journal, my father's letters, even the flash drives. Nothing new, until my grandma called me into her room, said she remembered a hidden safe built into the base of the china cabinet, a false compartment my grandfather had installed years ago. I don't think he ever used it, but maybe he changed his mind in the end. We pried the wooden base open with a screwdriver. The wood gave way. Inside was a blue metal box locked with a code. I tried the usual dates, birthdays, anniversaries. Nothing worked. But when I typed in my graduation date, it clicked. Inside was just one cassette tape and a piece of paper with 3 words. For my daughter. But my grandfather never had a daughter. My grandma turned pale. She trembled. "No, that can't be," she whispered. I asked her to sit down, plugged in the tape converter, and hit play. The voice was my grandfather's. He spoke of a mistake he made in his youth, an affair outside his marriage, that from it a daughter was born, that he never acknowledged her out of shame. But at the end of his life, he tried to make things right, and that daughter was my mother. My mother wasn't just a stepdaughter. She was his biological child hidden from the world, but disinherited not because of that, but because of who she became. He tried to include her. She used that to manipulate, to lie, to destroy. It all made sense now. And it all felt even more tragic because her obsession with control came from a real place. The pain of never being fully accepted. But still, she made her choices. I showed the tape to the prosecutors. It didn't change the legal case, but it explained the behavior. And for me, that was enough. Knowing the truth, understanding where I came from and where she came from, because now the final piece was in place, and my revenge could finally rest. Not with noise, but with dignity and the certainty that the cycle had been broken. A few months later, the case was closed. My ex was convicted of fraud and conspiracy, James for organized crime involvement. My mother got a reduced sentence but lost everything. The family fell apart, but I remained beside my grandmother, beside Miranda, beside myself, whole for the first time. That Christmas, I sat at the table surrounded by people who looked at me with truth. I smiled, took a deep breath, and as I poured the wine, I said out loud, "To the women who didn't scream but still won." And as I raised my glass, my grandma whispered, "Your father would be proud."